Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be walking you through how I created a GraphQL server for the Petfinder API. This is actually a project that I've been wanting to do for a while, but what was holding me back was creating the type defs in GraphQL, because if you look at any one of these endpoints, there's just a ton of query parameters, and some of them are enumerated in the values that they have. So just going through all of these would just take so long, and that was really daunting to me. So I recently decided to actually go for it because I was looking around at the Petfinder API docs, and at the very bottom I found this developer resources section, which has a Petfinder Open API specification. So to be clear, I didn't know anything about Open API before I did this, but I was like, hey, Open API sounds like a standard. Maybe there's some sort of conversion to GraphQL schema. So I Googled OpenAPI to GraphQL schema, and the first thing that came up was this IBM repo, OpenAPI to GraphQL. So this is how I actually generated all of the type defs for my GraphQL server. So after I found that tool, I installed it globally and then downloaded the OpenAPI specification for Petfinder, and then I ran the command OpenAPI to GraphQL OpenAPI YAML, which is what I called the Petfinder OpenAPI specification, -- save schema.graphql, which is where we're going to save the type defs for the GraphQL schema. So cool, it looks like that worked. After generating the GraphQL schema, I actually ended up making a couple manual modifications. The first was that this one resolver, getAnimalById, was named animal2 for some reason. Ended up renaming that to just animal. And then the other thing was that what it was returning, animal2, was just an object with a single property. So I ended up getting rid of animal2 and just had this return a single animal object. And then the same thing happened for organization. And I ended up making the same changes there. So once I had the GraphQL schema sorted out, I could work on the actual server. I decided to use Apollo Server Express just because that's the one I'm most familiar with. And the basics are we pass in the type defs, which were just the same ones that we were using from the generated schema. We also pass out a resolvers object, which consists of two separate sets. The first is enum alias resolvers, which is used to define aliases for each one of the enums, because in the GraphQL schema, everything is defined in all caps, whereas the Petfinder API expects your variables to be in lowercase. So we define resolvers for each one of those enums. The second set of resolvers are the Petfinder resolvers, and these are the ones that actually query the Petfinder API. And if you take a look at these, each one of them is pulling off the fetch Petfinder route from context, which we'll talk about in a minute, and using that to fetch from the Petfinder API. In a couple of the cases, like animals and organizations, there are some arguments that you can pass it, and we use the query string library to pass those as URL parameters because that's how the Petfinder API has it defined. And then lastly, we pass the Apollo server our context, which is what defines the fetch Petfinder route function. Inside that function, the first thing we do is get an access token, and that's an OAuth access token that we need for the Petfinder API. And if we take a look at that function, first we check in this Petfinder access token cache to see if there's a value there. And if there is, then we return the access token. Otherwise, we have to get a new access token, which we do passing the following parameters using your Petfinder key and Petfinder secret that you get from the developer API. Once we've fetched the access token, we set the value in the cache with a value to expire in 2 minutes less than what it tells us, and we do that just in case for network latency. So once we have the get access token, we fetch whatever URL was passed to this function, and then we're good to go. And with that, I had a working Petfinder API GraphQL server. If you're interested in the code, I'll post a link to the GitHub repo in the description below. Later.